So one of the moves this week in one of our local municipalities got a lot of attention, and it was right in Prairie Village. And you are seeing this happen in various municipalities around the region. But Prairie Village, the latest, to put some restrictions on Airbnbs and short-term rentals. The new law, the new rule is basically going to say you've got to do at least a 30-day, as I understand it, rental on any Airbnb property, and you have a year to implement that. So Lori Sharp is here on KCMO. She is a member of the Prairie Village City Council. Lori, thanks for joining us on KCMO. Always appreciate the time. What are the major things in this new piece of legislation that passed this week that will impact Prairie Village?
Well, I think you mentioned them. It is the limitation of 30 days, and we did make this not be implemented until November of 2025, which allows people, if this is what they own, it's an investment for them. It allows them to decide for the year, are they going to turn it into a long-term rental? Are they going to move into it? Are they going to sell it? So they have options, and they're not forced to do something right away.
Now, this is always a tricky spot, and it seems like it doesn't necessarily fit along certain party lines. I've made it very clear on this show, I'm a proponent to this, but there are some people who will say, hey, it's my property. You can't tell me what to do with my property. How have you handled that back and forth?
Well, the government tells us what to do with our property a lot of times. Yeah. They tell you how tall you can build your house, how much on the property you can build on your property. They tell you whether you can have chickens or pigs on your property. When you cut down a tree in Prairie Village on your property, you have to actually replace it with another tree. They tell you can't have a meth lab in your house. So the government definitely has influence on what you do to your property. And this is R1 zoning. A lot of the HOAs are against this. And so it's really, neighbors spoke out by the hundreds saying that what they want in their neighborhoods are neighbors, regular, consistent neighbors. And so this is not overstepping at all. Overstepping would be if the government takes over your property and you don't have options with it. This doesn't even come close.
Because you can still do an Airbnb if someone wants to do a 30-day stay, or you can turn it into a long-term rental, which will still be highly desirable in Prairie Village.
Correct. All of that's correct. And the 30-day minimum actually coincides with the, everybody's talking about the World Cup. Mm-hmm. Well, the World Cup lasts a whole month in July, 30 days. So a lot of people can utilize that during the World Cup and maybe have a little bit of income, and then they can still use it for longer term rentals.
How did this come to be? Was there something or a couple of things that made this such a hot button topic there that made this to a place where you guys were voting on it?
Well, actually, the previous council, made a list of issues that were the most important right then during Prairie Village. And then they prioritized that list. And the two topics they had that were on the top were teardowns and remodels and the short-term rentals. And I have to say, when I campaigned, those were the top things residents talked to me about. And I campaigned all over the city because I helped out other wards. And so I heard about teardowns and remodels and short-term rentals. And, of course, I heard about taxes, people having too high of taxes and not being able to afford Prairie Village. But what the residents said is they always knew which houses were the short-term rentals because people were constantly coming and going at different times of the night. There was parking issues on the road, or sometimes even people just drove up and parked on the lawn. Garbage was set out the wrong days and would sit out. Extra dogs in the neighborhood, and sometimes without leashes because they didn't know our leash laws. And then, of course, the parties. Those were the things you heard about as well. So essentially, it was like a mini hotel operating right next to you across the street or in your neighborhood.
Did you consult with any other cities? I believe Leawood has done something similar. You can probably cite the other ones who have done something like this. Did you consult with any of them before you guys made your decision?
Yes. Actually, we've been looking at this for a year. We've discussed it in council for several months, and our staff and our legal did an excellent job of putting together a bunch of information for us of all the different cities. We were given the list of all the different cities and a detailed list of what they were doing for their city. So Leawood and Mission Hills were the ones I gravitated to. I thought they did a really good job. And just also listening to staff and the city administrator, they honestly didn't know how we would regulate this. I did a Coro report asking for how many long-term and short-term rentals, and I got back that they don't have the actual numbers. We have somewhere between 800 long-term rentals, but they don't separate the licenses, so they didn't know exactly how many were short-term and how many were long-term. The only way they knew we have about 30 is by looking up on the Airbnb website. So it's a really difficult idea to regulate, and so it looked like it would require more staff, which is more money, and then we're asking our taxpayers to pay for this on something they don't even really want.
So then how, Lori Sharp is here, Prairie Village City Council, they put not a ban on Airbnbs, but they put a limit, or I guess a minimum of 30 days on Airbnbs that starts next year, 2025, November. So it won't cost more money to make sure this is being done and regulated properly?
Well, we do have codes and we do have police that are already in place. And obviously, I think there will be a cost, at least initially, to implement the ban, but the cost would have been much greater if we put on specific regulations for short-term rentals and then had to follow up continuously to make sure they were complying.
Gotcha. So it's really going to come from neighbors informing the city? Is that the best way to explain this? Because you're not going to have cops going door to door on rentals.
Correct. And that is the issue. And I do find Prairie Village residents seem to be very patient people. And so that was the issue. We didn't have a lot of police reports because I think what happened and what I heard from residents is, there'd be a party going on or somebody be walking, letting a dog run around, and it was the short-term rental. And they wouldn't call the police because they'd say, oh, that person's going to be gone tomorrow anyways. What does it matter? So we didn't have a lot of reports, just oral reports when we'd walk in the neighborhood. And so in the future going forward, I really encourage the residents to reach out to the city so that the city can make sure these are actually following the rules.
Will that be through, 911 if it's extreme, but is there just going to be a line or something to call for that?
I don't know. I don't think that's been worked out yet, but there is a non-emergency police number.
Okay. So what do you say to other cities? I know that some have considered it. I know there have been conversations probably in most municipalities in Johnson County. What would you say to them as they consider this, but they also don't want to feel like they're overstepping property rights?
Well, again, as I said, the government is definitely tells us what to do with our property. But for me, it came down to my job, I feel, as a city council member is for public safety and also to represent my residents. So I looked at the issues as far as, is this a public nuisance and safety? And from listening to the hundreds of residents, I decided it was. And for me, running for city council was all about listening and representing the residents. They need to be heard. And I had literally hundreds of residents email me, call me, text me, come to the meeting. And a huge majority, they just don't want this. They want neighborhoods filled with neighbors. And it's my duty to listen to the residents. And so I would challenge other city councils to do the same. Maybe their residents are okay with it. I don't know. But this is what our residents of Prairie Village said. And
I assume there are several HOAs in Prairie Village, right?
Yes.
So could they have done their own rules around this? Or
a majority of the HOAs do not allow these.
Okay.
And to change an HOA, you almost have to have a unanimous vote for the HOA. It's very difficult. So predominantly the HOAs do not allow short-term rentals.
But it's hard if they don't have anything in their bylaws to implement this.
It's also hard because they don't have deep pockets.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And you're seeing it. And it's not just mom and pops with the Airbnbs, right? I mean, you've got LLCs all over the country buying up property in desirable parts of Johnson County and then flipping them to make some money on Airbnb.
That's absolutely true. When we first started getting letters from the owners, I would ask each one, I'd say, thank you for your email. Where do you live? And of the, let's say, 8 that I received, only 2 were Prairie Village residents.
Wow.
So you had outside residents, you had outside commercial property owners. I do have to say I did meet with a couple of the owners from Prairie Village. Wonderfully, well-spoken, kind, reasonable people. And, it's hard. These decisions are hard. But I had to go with, ultimately, again, the safety of the residents and listening to the majority of the residents. So that was why I made my decision.
Lori Sharp, and that was an overwhelming, 10-2 vote, right?
It was, yes.
Okay. So it wasn't like it was even all that close. 10-2, everyone was pretty much on board.
Right, but there still was a lot of gnashing of teeth and wringing of hands going on,
Yeah.
but it was 10-2.
As always, Lori Sharp on KCMO, Prairie Village City Council. That Airbnb 30-day limitation goes into effect next November after the vote this week. Lori, thank you so much for the time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.